Hello! Today we have 6th edition of Stoic Pragmatism Open Seminars Online, and the title for today is Why has cultural pluralism so often been a challenge? So this is a question and a problem for today. And as usual, I want to first ask a couple of questions and present some issues and then develop them and try to answer these questions. So the first question is, when did the term cultural pluralism appear in pragmatism and what did it refer to? The second question, can we talk about cultural pluralism in the context of Stoic pragmatism? And at the very beginning, I would like to say yes, the answer is affirmative. 3. Why cultural pluralism in a colloquial meaning is so challenging? I mean, why it is a big problem for so many people to assume such a stance. 4. Any links with the Stoic idea of cosmopolitanism? And I would like to show certain connections with certain types of cosmopolitanism and link it with the idea of cultural pluralism. 5. What is the difference between cultural pluralism and such cultural policies as multiculturalism, the melting pot, globalization, DEI, EDI? At the very beginning, I would like to focus on this term policy or policies. Cultural pluralism, in the meaning that I present now, it is not a policy. It is a kind of standpoint, but I will get back to this. So at the beginning, just to outline the idea of culture is because culture, the term culture probably I will use frequently, and then in our discussion we will use it. So let me present just a short sort of definition that will be helpful for us to understand what we are talking about. So the first and short version is John Locke's, who wrote in my book, edited by me, such a definition: a collection of the tendencies and behaviors of actual people. My definition from my book is very similar, but a little bit longer. And it reads, culture is a more or less established way of living and thinking of a given group of people in a given geographical territory in a given historical time. So this is the understanding of the term culture that I will be using here while talking about cultural pluralism. And what is cultural pluralism? The original formulation was given by Horace Cullen, and he wrote that it is a standpoint. So it is not a policy, it is a standpoint. In my language, in my vocabulary, I would prefer a philosophical stance, saying that culture implies a positive and sympathetic recognition and understanding of differences or cultural differences. The word sympathetic is crucial here, and differences also is crucial here. What was the context of Cullen's idea? It was sketched 100 years ago, more or less, and it is interesting because I will suggest that the context was in some way pretty similar to our cultural context nowadays in the West. So he was a German Jewish immigrant to the United States. He studied at Harvard under Santayana and William James. And for him, the main ideas were America's multicultural society, democracy, pluralism, immigration to the US, the melting pot policy in the US, and the United States involvement in the First World War. So this context is kind of similar because nowadays we have discussions in all countries in the West about multicultural societies, the role of immigrants, how to assimilate immigrants, how democracy should function in a pluralistic society. So the topics are pretty similar. And the main challenges for cultural pluralism in this philosophical meaning, but also for colloquial meaning, these are two different things, but I think challenges are pretty similar, are the following. Are different cultures equal? Or different cultures are more or less the same? It's a very tough question to answer. I mean, maybe the formulation of the question is easy, but the answer is very difficult. Second, are values culture dependent? Or perhaps we have values or some moral points of reference that are not dependent upon a given culture. So there are some who say that, for example, dignity is human dignity is something that is not culture dependent, or human rights, that it is not culture dependent. But of course, there are many people who would say that dignity, human rights, these are Western constructs that are being imposed upon other societies. So the question is open, and a debate, many debates about this are taking place all the time. The next question and the next challenge for cultural pluralism would be, does cultural pluralism exclude local affiliations and identifications? Because if we recognize in a sympathetic way different forms of culture, is it not the case that we are tending to think that our native affiliations are as if on the same level as affiliations of people who are from far away? And then there is not big difference if we are cultivating our own culture or some other culture. A similar question, yet different, is, does cultural pluralism entail cultural uprooting and hence disorientation and vulnerability? So when we, for example, change culture, we emigrate, we go to another country, does it not mean, or can it not mean, that what follows is cultural uprooting? Or, for example, changing our loyalty to our native country or native culture and loyalty more to this new country or new culture. So cultural pluralism in this sense would be the following context, that we recognize different cultures, but should we be loyal to different cultures as well? Or should we be loyal to our, let's say, native culture or the culture we think is ours? So the question of loyalty is an issue here. Here I would like just to signal what cultural pluralism in the meaning of this phrase that I'm presenting now is not. So it is not policy. It is not, for example, the melting pot. Melting pot was the phenomenon in the United States and other countries, but mainly in the United States, that was a sort of national policy of assimilation of immigrants who were coming from different countries. So it was pluralistic and multicultural phenomenon where many people from different cultures were coming to America, to the United States. We are not talking about Canada, we are talking about the United States. And the policy was that Americans expect that after some time, sooner or later, these immigrants, these newcomers, would become Americanized soon or a bit later, for example, in the second generation or third generation. The children of immigrants should go to American schools, learn English, respect American legal system, and become Americanized, so that it would be simply persons coming from different cultures having international background, but they become American. It was the idea of the melting pot. Multiculturalism is also, or has been also, a policy, but especially in Canada, Sweden, Australia, and later in many other countries, that would, the main idea was that cultures, different cultures, deserve equal status. Canada was exemplary because, as we know, in Canada, in the 1960s, 1970s, there was the idea of biculturalism or biculturalism, where French-speaking Canadians and English-speaking Canadians, they were on the same level as far as legal system is concerned, cultural policy is concerned. And then Canada became multicultural because there were First Nations and there were immigrants, Ukrainians, Polish, and so on. So the idea was that the state of Canada and the provinces of Canada should recognize the equality of status of different demographics. DEI, very controversial nowadays, is a policy within mainly some institutions like educational universities and big corporations, for example, where the idea was quota, that we need to have the representatives of different demographics, of different cultures. So the idea is that we should have this demographic, this demographic, this demographic, that demographic, for example, in one department or one university, so that it would be equal. And globalization, a different story, mainly within the economic world, when it means the process of internationalization, where corporations, for example, do not recognize the national borders. And actually for corporations or the bosses of the corporations, it really does not really make any difference if you are from this country, from that country, and you want to promote your business wherever you can. So I don't want to talk about these things. Cultural pluralism, in the meaning of the term that I propose to promote, is something different. It's not policy or making policy. It's much more what Santayana, the teacher of Cullen and teacher of John Locke's, main philosophical figure for John Locke's, Santayana, George Santayana, or Jorge Santayana, because he was Spanish-American, said, and he famously said that human virtues and human forms of society have various natural models according to differences of nature or of circumstances. So it is a statement that refers to naturalistic philosophy, that it is something biologically described or naturalistic vindicated, that different societies, communities, cultures, and traditions, they, in the process of time, they develop their own natural models according to the nature of these societies and according to the circumstances that these societies face. So there is not one model. There are different models because different societies live in different circumstances and have different characters. So the recognition of these natures or these characteristics of these societies or cultures and recognitions of the circumstances has crucial role here. And this is something that makes me propose a sort of map that is or constitutes the background for cultural pluralism idea. On the one hand, the Stoic part of this idea is cosmopolitanism and okaiosis, that can be translated as widening circles of concern. And on the pragmatist side, it is pluralism as one of the most important ideas of the pragmatist tradition. William James, for example, was the promoter of this idea of pluralism as such, and Cullen, cultural pluralism. John Locke, in one of his books, was talking in this cosmopolitan, pluralistic project, but in the version of circles of concern. For those who do not remember, the famous metaphor, when we have a stone thrown into the water and there are waves around. And the waves may have different scale of intensity. And the idea of the Stoics and John Locke's here is this. We should distinguish our obligations and loyalties, we may say, between those near and dear and those around the globe. So there is a big difference as far as obligations and loyalties are concerned between those who are close to us and ourselves in the first place and those who are far away. And as Locke says, I must not prefer meeting my children's needs to feeding the hungry in East Timor. So the idea would be, in Santayana's formulation, adult educated people should respect all traditions and understand all passions, and at the same time they should possess and embody a particular culture. So the idea is that we should, as cultivated people, tolerant people, living in contemporary world, we should respect all traditions and passions. However, it does not mean that we want to cut off or reduce the meaning of a particular culture that we ourselves represent. And the neo-Stoic stance, famously presented by Martha Nussbaum, is a sort of updated version of cosmopolitanism in its widening circles of concern version. It says that family ties, friends, can be kept without obligations to anybody else, and we, in the modern time, we can use a just tax system to regulate that. The relationship with those whom we do not know, who are far away, yet with keeping more ties with those who are close to us, for example, families. And what she also promotes, the idea that patriotism is not contrary to concern with people outside of national borders. It is not contradictory. And the role of civic education should be crucial here. So it is clear reference to old Stoic cosmopolitan idea in its oikeiosis or concentric circles version into our contemporary world. Thank you.